Hello and welcome to Gosh. And I am going to start with a brief history of Gosh and how it came about in my life. It's a couple of years ago and I had breast cancer and I was having chemotherapy. I need to explain that I have been clairaudient all of my life. I've always heard voices, which is a Gosh moment in itself. And they've always been positive and they've always instructed me in ways to be sensible and wise. So I was having chemotherapy and one of my guides said to me, "We'd like you to start Gosh." And I thought, good heavens, what's that? Yes, all right. What is it? And the answer was, it's an acronym, which they know I love, for Gatherings Over Strange Happenings. And I said, all right, but not right now. I'm a little sick. And it took me a few months and I did start it, and I started it locally. I was very surprised with the amount of people who came out of the woodwork in a small area who had one or two stories from their lives that they wanted to share of unusual events. And then COVID came along and I was very nicely offered the chance to put it, Gosh, onto a global platform. And that has been going for a couple of years, very successfully. A small group of people from all over the world, and we talk about anomalous events that have happened to us or to people we know or that we've heard about. And so Gosh was really originally designed to be a safe and validating group for people who've had any sort of unusual, non-ordinary experience in their lives. But it occurred to me that the world needs to hear more about these things. And around this time, a mutual friend put me in touch with the founder of Beyond Being Human, Michael Ney, and he's given me this opportunity to bring people who are ready to talk about their non-ordinary life to a much wider platform. So that's the history of Gosh. And I'd like to introduce my participants today. I've got Bill Raine, who is a retired principal engineer in machinery safety from England. And after the passing of his daughter-in-law, who was only 41 in 2018, Bill started to seek answers to why this happened. And this was the start of his journey of discovery into the realms of the unknown. The first 2 years of his journey are documented in his book, The Awakening, Our Journey. And it's the recorded evidence given into understanding his question of why and a greater awareness of who and what we truly are. We also have Casey. So Casey is an American businesswoman, founder and author. She's recently founded the home decor and houseware brand Hazelnut Canary. She spends her downtime sharing experiences of inner wisdom, direct knowing, intuition, and a fuller understanding of the way we perceive ourselves and our world. She is also a loss advocate, a children's book author, organ donation ambassador, animal ally, and kicker of cancer's butt. Me too. And then we have Gloria, who's a long history in academia here, Master of Science degree in economics from Purdue University in Indiana. She's also an instrument and commercial pilot. She also flew extensively for Purdue University, the University of Nevada, Reno, Louisiana State University, and the University of Delaware. I'll actually ask Gloria, perhaps to kick us off, as to what got her interested in the non-ordinary. Thanks, Gloria.
Thank you. I would say life experiences and then the big shock of losing my husband of 30 years. It was an interruption in normal, and it forced me to identify and recognize things I'd taken for granted in the past. And so many things have happened since he transitioned. And because you mentioned that I was a pilot, I'll start with some interesting transportation-related events. One was shortly after I moved to Baton Rouge, and it's been over a decade ago now. I was out with two friends, and we had driven across the Mississippi River to Acadiana to a dance hall, and we were experiencing Cajun culture, and it was lovely, and we stayed out too late. And I was driving because I was the one who wasn't drinking. And we got back quite after midnight. And as I pulled off the Mississippi River Bridge to drop off my first friend, I came to an intersection that was completely blind on the left side. And I stopped at a light. There was a light there, and the light changed. And a friend was in the front seat and a friend was in the back seat. And I distinctly heard a voice when the light changed to green. The voice said, "Wait." And this amount of time went by. And my passenger in the front seat said, "Aren't you going to go?" And just then, from the left, the blind side to the right, our car going over 100 miles an hour shot through the intersection. There was no way we could have seen it. Our windows were up, so we didn't hear it coming. And we were all just sitting there in shock. Then I did proceed very slowly and carefully through the intersection. And I had thought that one of my passengers had told me to wait, but it was another voice. All three of us would have been killed. The car was just going too fast. And whoever was in the other car would have been killed too. My flying experiences, several of them very, very interesting. It was in the Midwest, and I was flying, I think, for Purdue at the time, Purdue University. It was a beautiful day, and I looked out the side window because I was in the left seat, and I looked out the left window. Beautiful farmland, and all of a sudden, there in the middle of nowhere, there was a runway. And I heard this voice say, "That would be a good place to land." And I said out loud, "Yes, that would be a good place to land." And as I looked at the instrument panel, my oil pressure gauge flopped to 0. And anybody who knows anything about engines is you don't run an engine without oil. And so I quickly notified air traffic control that I was making an emergency landing and pulled back the throttle. And I landed at that runway. It was right under my left wing. An important message to me in my life. Another time when I was flying for Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, I was scheduled to take the State Department of Environmental Quality director to a public meeting in Lake Charles from Baton Rouge. And I kept watching the weather all day, and I just had this feeling. It looked like we could make it just fine. But at the last minute, I called him and I said, "We're not going." Oh, he was so upset. And his staff, they were so upset. And I got called some names, and some words were used. Around the time that we would have flown to Lake Charles, tornadoes went through that whole area and just did a lot of destruction. So the next day I got a bunch of apologies. Uh-huh. But again, it was something I was told, and I was very grateful for it, even though I didn't understand it. And then the last one I'd share with you would be, again, transportation related. I was flying someone to Plymouth, Massachusetts. And at the time I was at University of Delaware. And I tried 3 times to shoot an approach into the Plymouth runway. And it didn't have an IFR landing system, instrument flight rules. And 3 times I could not get down low enough to see the runway because of the clouds. And when you're flying IFR, when you get to whatever the absolute minimum is, if you don't see the runway, you bounce back up because then you're not safe. So 3 times I went down, I couldn't see the runway. 3 times I went around. And the passengers all said, "Well, just stay here and try it again. Just keep circling and try it again." And I was told no. And I asked air traffic control where a plane could get in. And I was told Hyannis. And I went to Hyannis and shot the approach and got in just barely. And that was it. The whole Cape Cod area of Massachusetts actually shut down for 3 days. I was the last landing in that area. And then for 3 days, the fog was so thick, there was no air traffic in and out of the Cape. So I felt very blessed to have been given those messages.
Thank you. It sounds like you're a little clairaudient yourself. But it did make me wonder, how many pilots have that sort of intuition or that assistance? Have you ever talked to anyone else that had that sort of thing happening as a pilot?
Mostly I was working with engineers and scientists. That's not one of the things that they talk about. It was something that I would share with family and friends, and my children are used to hearing my stories, but not so much the engineers and scientists that I worked with.
Thanks, Gloria. We'll move on to you, Casey. What started you off in your interest in intuition and wisdom?
I have felt that I have never been ordinary, so I have felt that I've been non-ordinary. I do love that phrase. And I've always felt that way. I used to say as a child, I'm not from around here. I didn't know where I was from, but I just didn't feel that I was from around here, wherever that may be. Similar to your story, Kim, when I have had suffering or trauma, I have noticed that I'll call them my gifts have become more obvious or more magnified. My husband as well passed away rather tragically at 42. And after that, it was in 1999, I began receiving like downloaded messages. I would get information, typically not about me, about someone else. As soon as I would receive the information, I would forget it. It was as though my mind was just wiped of the information. I couldn't remember after, but I could remember who it was about. And over time, I learned to capture the information by taking notes or whatever I could do when I received the information. And then I would have my memories sort of wiped out of the information, but I could refer to it, and it wouldn't even ring a bell. I wouldn't even remember receiving that information. And that was always in reference to someone else. And somehow those people would find me, and I would receive the information sometimes for years for an individual. And they would stay with me. If I received any information, I would send it to them. And then one day it would just stop. Then I would start getting information on someone else. And then they would find me. So it was never really something I felt that I could talk about, to coworkers or anything like that. But like you had said, Gloria, my child certainly knew what was going on because he was always around. He would be witness to these types of things. It wasn't until I found Gosh that I felt my gifts were of value to anyone. Before Gosh, I did not see the value. An entire life when I thought, typically I'm precognitive is what I would call it. And so I would know something right before it happened, right before it happened, or right as it happened, or as it was happening, or immediately around it happening. So I never felt that I was psychic. I never felt that I could, read the future. I always looked at it as an illumination. I would feel that I was able to shed light on something that maybe if I told you about, you would say, "Oh, I could have articulated that if I found the words." It's just been an ability to just shed light on something is the only way I've looked at it. My son used to say, "Geez, if they could only pull the lottery numbers while you stood there and filled out the paperwork," because again, he didn't see the value either. He just knew something was going on. And I've never really thought of myself as special. I feel like we're all special and we all have something to some degree. We just maybe don't practice or hone it or work with it or look at it. But when I found Gosh to me is even more bonded than a family. We are able to come together and share very differing views without any judgment at all. That's really the beauty of it. And then receive feedback, all different types of feedback that have expanded me way beyond myself. I'm using all my words that may not, mean the same to another person, but I've always been inside myself with this information. It's come to me. It's been inside of me. But Gosh has blown me out of myself into the collective consciousness or the collective unconsciousness. I'm not sure which it is or if it's both, but I've been able to take this feedback and see that I can use the information I'm getting in these gifts that I'm calling that I have, that I can now not just get information about the what that's going on, but I'm getting feedback that's allowing me to use this as direction, which way to go in my life, to use it as a way to set goals. I'm speaking very practically, but this is my life, and it's allowing me to achieve goals that I wouldn't have even considered. So I've just really opened up and see that this really is special to me. And I'm able to now, through this interaction with Gosh, really just see it in a much bigger, more beautiful way that's not only helping me, but allowing me to help others in a much bigger way as well, because I'm understanding things a lot better. And I just don't know where we're going from here, but it's pretty exciting.
Wow, thank you. If it was just for one person, then Gosh has really meant a great deal in your life, which is fabulous to know as the founder of Gosh. Yeah. And that is the beauty of the non-ordinary events. They're actually ordinary, but we've been taught for so many, a couple of 100 years, I think, to forget about them, that in fact it's not part of life. And if you're seeing or hearing anything like this, then there's something wrong with you. Whereas in actual fact, it's an enhancement to life, which is really exciting to hear that that's happening for you, that you're seeing the benefits of all of that. And that is one of the aims of Gosh for me in the future, that we normalise discussion around all these events, because the majority of people have at least one non-ordinary event in a lifetime, and there's no one to talk to about it because it's just been so much it makes you an object of scorn or questions your health. It's pathologized, in fact, in some cases. Thank you so much for sharing that, Casey. All right, Bill.
Where to start after those? November 2018, my youngest son's wife passed within 3 months of a diagnosis of cancer. And she left two boys under 4 years of age, which they'd been married for 13 years. And my son was absolutely devastated, as was I. And I needed answers as to why they would take such a vibrant person who really loved the kids. She fitted straight into our family. She was just, yes, she was very nice looking and pleasant. She was a travel agent, manager of a shop, helped a lot of people with the problems with travel and stuff like that. But she integrated into the family so well. And she couldn't understand how close our family was, and well, still is. It's something that I was brought up with, because my mother had 3 sisters and 3 brothers, so there was 7 in the family that survived out of 13. And we were always visiting each other, even though we lived, it was a long bus ride away long before cars. But after Catherine passed, it was just a blur until after we got through Christmas. How we got through Christmas, I just don't know. But we did. And I started looking for answers. And the kids looked after the dad, and they said, look, Dad, you need to get one of these phones with pictures on and Facebook and this, that, and the other. Because I just had an ordinary phone. You could send a message off phone. And I always go by, it's good to talk. But anyway, I got one of these phones, and there was one day I just opened it up, clicked on Facebook, and there was an advertisement for an open circle at the local spiritualist church. And I thought, well, that's strange. I've never even thought about anything like that. So I never bothered with it. Just dismissed it and thought no more about it until 2 weeks later. Open the phone again, another advert. Open Circle meeting Wednesday night, 7:00. And I thought, well, I don't really understand the address. I knew there was a spiritualist centre at the top of the village, but I didn't know there was another one because it said 6th Street, and I knew 6th Street was way down into the village. So I'd gone down one day and I actually drove down 6th Street, and I just happened to look right, and he's the Independent Spiritualist Friendship Centre. I thought, oh, that's where it is. Came back home, thought no more about it till the following Wednesday night. The phone rang, it was my son. He says, oh, put something on Facebook, Dad, have a look at it. He says, okay, then. I clicked on Facebook and the advert came up. Wednesday night, Open Circle. And I looked at my watch and I thought, it's in half an hour's time. Quickly got washed and changed and went down to the church, and it was different. I felt quite peaceful rather than being distraught. It seemed as if there was quite a bit of weight lifted off my shoulders. And the medium gave me a message. It wasn't from Catherine or any of the family. She just said, there's a lot of problems around you. She says, you need to wrap them up and lock them away. And when you lock those away, you'll get a bunch of keys, and a bunch of keys will open many doors for you. So they did. Within sort of 2 months, they asked me to join the development circle for up and coming mediums, which that was hilarious. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I went in, and it was all women apart from me. I was the sole man sitting there in a circle, and there was 11 other women. And they said the Lord's Prayer. There was some funny music went on, which I'd never heard, weird stuff. There was twice I had to suppress a snigger. And because I was quite nervous, and I used to get wrong for it at school, laughing at the most inopportune moments. Anyway, the music finished, and it was 15 minutes meditation. And Irene, the medium, said, she says, you're a funny one. And I said, why is that? And she said, I don't think you're right for this circle somehow. She says, but there's definitely something there with you. And anyway, it went on for a few weeks. And I never really saw anything. I meditated. The mind went blank, and I never saw anything. I never heard anything. And then there was a young lady came to join the circle, and she actually sat opposite me this Saturday afternoon. And during meditation, I had a picture of this girl in my mind, but there was another girl standing beside her. Looked similar. You could say perhaps a sister, but the hair was different, the clothing was different. And we came out of meditation, and Irene asked each one of us, what did you get? And I pointed to this young girl. I didn't even know her name. And I said, well, I saw a vision of this girl. I says, but there was somebody else standing beside her. I said it looked like a sister, but she had longer hair. I described it. This young lady spoke up and she said, that was my sister. She's my guide. And we were twins, but she died at childbirth. And that just absolutely blew me away, that I'd actually seen that. But then there was other things happened, and I was actually knocked out, taken over, you would say, in one session on a Saturday. We'd come out of meditation, and I hadn't really gotten nothing of any importance at all. Seen a few things, but no messages for anybody in the circle, no messages for the group. I had the feeling that there was somebody standing behind me. And you get that feeling that if you turn around, you're definitely going to see someone. But it was icy, icy cold. And in a lull in Irene asking the questions, I said, Irene, I think there's someone standing behind me. And she just looked up and she says, oh, yes, there is. She said, just close your eyes as if you're going into meditation and ask them to step back. So that's what I did. I closed my eyes and just gathered my thoughts, and I said, can you please step back? And there was just this loud voice in my ear said, you're not powerful enough. And that's the last thing I remember, until there was 3 of them working on me, trying to bring me back from wherever they took me. And the strange thing was, there was one lady who spoke Norwegian, and she was the only one in the group that wasn't fazed by it. And she'd actually swung her legs round and put her legs on the other seat that Irene had come off, and Irene was asking me to come back, please come back. They were the first words I can remember. And this girl Donna, the call, and she said, Irene, why didn't you just let him speak? Because apparently I'd been shouting in Norwegian. And I don't know Norwegian. I know tack, which is thanks, and that's about it. A few weeks after that, it happened again, although I wasn't knocked out. I was just taken somewhere else. Quite an interesting story. There was another guy came to the group, and he was actually a nurse in a hospice. And he mainly looked after terminally ill children. He came to the circle one Saturday, and he said, I've been asking Spirit all week to help me because I'm burnt out. He said, I cannot do this anymore. He said, what you've got to do is to be a former joker. You've got to be the rock for not only the children, but for the families. And he said, you have to wear this mask of positivity, and you haven't got to show emotion or anything like that. He says you can comfort them, but you can't show your own emotion. And I'm burnt out. He says, I don't want to do it anymore. And he said, today is the last day of the 7 days I gave Spirit to give me some help. And as he was saying this, I felt as if somebody stepped into me and they wanted to stand up and speak. And I was getting quite agitated. And there was another woman on the rostrum, because we always went up in pairs. And she could say there was something wrong with me. And she was trying to gesture, asking what's wrong. And I said, don't know. I just could feel it. And it was getting worse and worse that I should stand up and just say something. And the third time I looked up above her head, I saw a set of prison bars. That was the first thing I saw, a set of prison bars. And the thought came into my head, you're in prison, you need to get out. And then the prison bars changed to a rabbit. And I thought, right, fear or flight, I'm going. And I just picked me books up and I went towards the door. And Irene said, where are you going? I said, I can't do this anymore, Irene. And she says, let's sit down and talk about it. And I put my books down and I turned around. And that's the last thing I remember until I came to, and I was in my own kitchen at home. The kettle had just boiled, and it was the noise of the kettle that brought me back. And the tears were streaming down my face. I knew absolutely nothing at all of how I'd get back home. So I went outside, and the car was parked 2 inches off the wall, absolutely perfectly. And I don't know to this day who parked the car, because when I asked, nobody brought me home. Nobody would speak to me out of the group, and I was literally a pariah. And I decided, did I really want to do it? But apparently I'd said to Irene, I'll support the church, but I'm not coming back to the circle. A few weeks after that, there was a woman called Frida Robson came to the church, and it was what she called what was called, not determined as a trance night. So there was a red light, and the rest of the lights were quite low. And Frida sat in a chair with a red light on a little table beside her. And her face changed to a different woman. And it was a different voice, and she brought through this woman whose family was in the audience. And in the audience was the grandson, who was now aged about 22. And she asked him to step forward. And the grandson stepped forward towards Frida. And she said, "Take my hand." And he took the hand of Frida. But the face was of his grandmother. And she told him the exact words she'd said to that grandchild 10 years previously, before she passed. And he'd held her hand as she passed. And Frida spoke the exact words. So his mother and his elder brother, who were also there when she passed, they just floods of tears. It was absolutely fantastic. And then something in my mind just said, that's what you want to do. So it took 10 weeks before I actually sat with Frida. A little circle. There was only 3 of us, an observer, Frida and myself. And this is the last little bit I'm going to tell you. So we sat down and Frida said, right, it's just the same as if you're sitting in your circle. She says, we'll just sit together side by side. She said, we'll say the Lord's Prayer, close our eyes. She says, and my guide will come through and then we'll find out what's happening. And I thought, oh, well, that sounds like a plan. I'd taken a tape recorder, and which he'd asked me to do. So we switched the tape recorder on and we started. And then I heard this man's voice come from next to me, which was out of Frida. And this man was talking about my guide. And I was thinking, well, how does he know my guide? I haven't got a guide. I've never heard anybody of anything like that. And then he says, right, he says, Bill, he says, you can speak, you can hear. He said, why don't you say something? And I'm thinking, well, I've got nothing to say, really. And he said, right, he says, your guide is going to speak and he's going to tell me what's going on. And then all of a sudden, there was just this voice came out of me, which wasn't mine, talking to this man that had come out of Frida. And they were talking about me and what was going on inside my head, it was just amazing. And he basically said, you don't know which path to take. He said, we cannot tell you which path to take, but we can assist you and we can help you. And that was the first session. And then since then, in all the sessions that Frida and I have sat, which is well over 50 now, every session has been recorded on audio and separately on video, every session. So we have a filmed record of every session we've ever done. And the evidence has been absolutely amazing. But the thing is, nobody in the church, the so-called spiritualist church, actually believed it. And then I was led on an advert again on my phone to the Afterlife Research and Discussion group. And then from that, the Gosh. And then I ended up with Gosh almost 2 years ago. And it's absolutely amazing because I can tell people in the group, about the things that happened to me. And they don't laugh and they don't decry what's happening to me, and my experience is unique to me as theirs is to them. And it just seems as if the group, and it's only a small group, but we've been brought together, and there's this synchronicity between us that quite often some of us will have or see the same things as what others do in the group, even though we are a continent away. And it's so amazing. I just love the group and I love the people that's in it. So that's my little bit, Kim.
It is a great group, isn't it, Phil? Thank you so much. You know what always strikes me about your story is how fast it all happened for you. I mean, people can sit in circle for years before anything happens for them, but you just took off like, well, I don't know, like a rocket, really, didn't you? It's a wonderful story. Yes. And the book is amazing as well. You really get some incredible information. And it's very heartening to know how much gosh means. And that is the beauty of it, is that nobody ever makes fun of anyone else's experiences. We all really do understand that these things happen for people, and we need to be able to share them. We need to. And it'll be a better world, I think, when we do. So I was thinking we could talk, well, we've talked a bit about some of our experiences, but we need to talk about them a bit more, because that's really what gosh is. And I was trying to think of some of the, I mean, I've got to admit, so many, as you know, that I've written books about them. But I was thinking some of the little ones can be extraordinary too, can't they? And I thought I'd share the one where I was walking one day. Now, most of my clairaudience will happen when I'm on a walk. It's like moving meditation for me. I was walking and this voice said to me, "What's the name of heaven?" And I was a bit gobsmacked, because for me, heaven is the name of heaven. It would never occur to me that there was any other name for heaven. And I'm sure it wouldn't occur to most people. And it puzzled me all day. And then the next morning I got up and I get the Merriam-Webster word of the day. I like words, so I'm always looking at new words. The word was welkin. And I looked at it and it said, filament of the sky, home of the gods. It actually said it was another word for heaven. And in fact, one of the carols we sing, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, used to be Hark all the welkin ring. And I loved it. I thought, what part of me knew that word, well, what really, it wasn't even part of me, because I had no concept that was another word for heaven. What knew that was going to be in my email box the next day, which is just the most fascinating thing, really, of all of it. And I was listening today about somebody getting an award for finding out about quantum entanglement, that they've pretty much scientifically proved this. If two particles have interacted, then they'll always interact to each other no matter how far apart they are. And I thought, it made me think of this particular story, and I thought, I didn't think I would know the person who chose that word for the day, or even if a person does choose it, whether it's a random computerized function who chooses the word for the day. So if I don't know them, it seemed to me it really supported an idea that cosmic consciousness is everywhere, and we're entangled is even doesn't really describe it. It's a real proof of a oneness of life, that we can tap into anything. So has anyone else got a small one that carries a punch, which I think Welkin does? Yeah, Gloria.
It's interesting in that through the Gosh group, as we've shared these things, I've become more open to recognizing them. It's made me more aware. This was before the Gosh group. After my husband died, there have been so many things since my husband died. I took a trip with a friend and we went to Cuba. We had been married, a very simple ceremony. And then about halfway through our marriage, we decided to renew our vows and to just have a blowout. And we did it as a fundraiser for a scholarship at Louisiana State University. We did that in 1989, and it was so romantic and so wonderful. It was the wedding I'd never had, and I had a gown, and everybody came, and it was wonderful. And then we went on a honeymoon afterwards. We flew over Niagara Falls, and it was fabulous. Anyway, so come forward now. My husband has died, and I'm going on this wonderful trip to Cuba that I've always wanted to go on. It's going to be lots of moving around in the country. And the first night we're in Havana, and I'm just miserable. I'm grieving because I'm not taking this trip with my husband. And I was just really, really upset. And grief had me. And I thought, this is terrible. How am I going to, enjoy this experience? We had brought a lot of things with us to give to the Cuban people because they experienced shortages. And soap, sewing kits. Every place we went, I would leave the clothes that I wore that day. I volunteer for an organization called CASA, which is Court Appointed Special Advocates for Abused and Neglected Children. So I had a whole bunch of CASA pins. Well, the first night, the place that we stayed in, because we couldn't stay in any government profited places, these were all individual places. And the couple that had sponsored us that night. They were so nice. And the name of their place in Havana was the Casa. So I got out all these pens and I kept giving this man who couldn't speak English these Casa pens. And he was so grateful because in English it said Casa, and that was the name of their little B&B. And so before we were leaving, he couldn't speak English, but he goes, wait. I said, yes. And he put a coin in my hand like this. And ever since my husband died, he's been leaving me coins. And I held my breath. I just held my breath. And I picked up this very unusual coin out of my hand, held my breath, and I turned it over to look at the date because my husband leaves me significant dates on coins. And it was the year we renewed our wedding vows. I cried and cried, but they were happy tears. I knew he was on the trip with me in Cuba, and I enjoyed the rest of the trip. And the poor little man at the hotel, he couldn't understand why he made me cry. Didn't I like the coin? I said, oh, I love the coin. And I'll keep the coin forever. It was just a really neat, and so many things like that have happened where, to me, it reminds me that the veil, as it's called, between us and them is very thin. And all we have to do is ask. All I have to do is ask. And I'm given so much encouragement. But it was a little gush, but to me, it was huge.
Thank you, Gloria. Yeah, little ones really can be huge, can't they? It doesn't take a lot to just suddenly shift you in some way. And the veil, I wonder whether the veil is there. The more we talk about all of these things, we can help to just pull that veil down so that more and more people understand that they can contact their deceased loved ones, or they can ask them for proof of existence of consciousness, which is what we're really talking about. Anyone else got a gosh that they'd like to share? Yeah, Bill.
Yes, I'd just like to share a one before I actually started. I'm a radio amateur, and I'd heard this voice calling from Norway, which is how I know a couple of words. And he wanted to speak to someone in Newcastle, actually, which is 25 miles up the road from me. And he was a teacher, and he was on an exchange. There was an exchange plan that he would come to Newcastle with a few other teachers. Anyway, the day came and I met him, and he was on his spare time. I met up and trolleyed around with him a while. And anyway, he trolleyed back home, and I got a letter from his wife saying thank you very much. And they invited us across that year, which unfortunately we couldn't manage. But the next year we went across. Yours Eric, he didn't want to go with us to this place called Roosendale or Rosedale, which we have a place just in Yorkshire called the same, Rosedale Abbey. Anyway, it ended up, there was myself, my wife, Turid, yours Eric's wife, and Randy, who was the lady that we actually stayed with. So we drove up to Rosedale. In Roosendale, there's a waterfall in the back of this what you would call a version of an English country estate. And the house is sort of built in the Georgian sort of era. And there's a rose garden. Of course, the ladies want to look at the carriages and all the dresses and everything like that. So little old May's just rolling around the rose garden. And there was a particular rose that stood out in all these rose beds, quite high. It was about 4 foot high, with this particular colour red rose. And I went across and stood beside this rose, and I started to weep. And the reason why was that when my grandmother was alive, on my dad's side, she was a great gardener. And there was a rose came out when I was about 14, and she'd bought it and never said anything until it actually flowered. We'd gone to visit her, and she said, right, come out in the garden, I've got something to show you. And she took us, me mum and dad and myself, to this rose bush. And there was this beautiful red rose on it, absolutely beautiful, and lovely fragrance and everything. And she said to me, Mum, Mrs. Rain, she says, this rose is named after you. It's called Ina Harkness. And my mother's name was Ina. And this rose in this garden in Norway was called Ina Harkness. And it just absolutely blew my mind that I'd go so far and to be so close to mum and dad, who passed in 83, and my grandmother, who passed in 73. And it just brought everything together, and I was on my own, and I'm the only child. And it was just so, heart went. Yes. That's my little gosh moment, Kim.
It's a very beautiful one, Bill. A very beautiful one. Flowers and feathers and coins, they mean a lot, don't they, when they're placed in the right. And the ability to place them is amazing, I think. But you, Casey, you've got any little goshes you'd like to share?
Well, like you all say, there are just so many. But a little one that seems to be a big one that is just most recent is the dream I shared with you all the other night about the white bull coming down from the clouds in the helicopter, the glass helicopter, and the agricultural farm and the rolling hills. And I didn't think much of it. It was just a glimpse. And I think, like Bill, I don't hear so much as see something in my mind or what have you. And I didn't think much of it, but when I received feedback again from the group, I looked into it and I was given that advice, read about the Native American and the white buffalo and the white bull and white cows. And it is really remarkable, absolutely remarkable what this implicates with the environment and what's going on with the earth and the things that we're doing to destroy it and not take care of it as much as we need to. And this deity, if you will, this savior that came from the sky to say, you need help, and we're sending help, and when I looked up what this meant, it was just remarkable. I mean, I guess I really don't have to say too much because it almost seems so obvious now when it didn't, at the time. And that's just my little story because it just happened so recently. Oftentimes I do have little gosh moments that aren't necessarily so profoundly wonderful. That did seem to be something to be concerned about, but also I felt such a sense of relief that we were getting help, that we are being sent help, that we're receiving help. And I think in some cases, I had shared with you another gosh where I just in my dream saw the banquet tables and everyone sitting at the table were deceased family members, except for my cousin, who was the only person who was not deceased at the table. And I couldn't imagine what that meant, but I had a feeling what it meant. And sure enough, he passed away with the same cancer that I had at the same stage I had. We were both going through treatment. And it just is so wonderful that the family was waiting for him. The family is there for him. And I didn't realize it at the time, but these were all family members from that side of the family. His mother was there and her sisters and my grandmother, who was the sister of his mother. And just to know that is so meaningful to all of us. And it caused me to ask for signs. I'd never done that before I'd heard about it. And gosh, I'd never asked for a sign. I didn't know how to go about asking for a sign. I had talked to a few members of the Gosh group, and we talked about it before Gosh and said, well, why don't we try an experiment? Why don't we ask for a sign? What would we ask for? Like, I don't know how to begin. I mean, I said, obviously, we're not going to ask for something like a kangaroo. What should we ask for? And that's when the hyacinth said, well, why don't we ask for a kangaroo? I said, what are the chances of? So we were quite sure that when we got on Gosh that evening, one of you would mention a kangaroo or we would see a kangaroo, but that didn't happen. So it wasn't until the following week. And I wondered, would anyone come in contact with a kangaroo? And I was cleaning up my phone before the Gosh meeting because it was slowing down. It wasn't working well. And it said, you've got no storage, clean up the phone. And was going through and just deleting hundreds of pictures, moving hundreds of pictures. And I was back to like 2018 and I'm swiping through the pictures and tagging them to move them. And there it was, the kangaroo. I just went, oh, it was there. And it was one solitary kangaroo. He was alone in the field. He was up against the fence and he was staring at me in the photograph. He was just staring at me. And he was a kangaroo in Texas. We were quite sure that the kangaroo would be in Australia. But he was in Texas because they raised kangaroos there. There are kangaroo farms there. And someone had visited her daughter and sent me the kangaroo photograph. I had forgotten all about it. So we get to Gosh and we met up with the girls before the Gosh meeting. And I thought, what are the chances? Every one of them saw a kangaroo. Every one of them. Anna read about a kangaroo, and every one of us. It was remarkable. And that happens just about every week in Gosh. Whatever I am experiencing through the week, what things that I'm talking about through the week, somehow through some radar love that we have going on, I come to Gosh, and not just one thing. This week it was Dolores Cann. It's many things. And it's just, I sit there and have these aha moments by myself because I don't even have to speak because you're all saying these things that happened throughout the week. And I just get more clarity and I ask for more signs. And I'm having animal visitors now. I have had this absolutely gorgeous red-shouldered hawk that is visiting me. I have pictures of him landing in the back, landing right next to my window and glaring at me with his eyes. I didn't even know we had such a thing as a red-shouldered hawk. It took a while to find out, what is this magnificent creature? Why is he here? But like the white cow, when you look into the spiritual meaning of these animals, then there's the guidance, there's the connection to my deceased loved ones, there's help for whatever I'm going through. And I have somehow found a way to, I don't worry anymore. I don't have anxiety or angst or concern. No matter what is going on outside externally in my life, I don't pay any attention to it. I stay with my knowing, and I stay with the universal divine intelligence that, for example, didn't save me from cancer to kick my ass on the beach. I've been saved so that I don't have to have the worry of more trouble. I just ignore trouble, and I stay with the knowing that I'm part of something so much bigger. I'm connected to it. I'm not only connected to it, I'm living it. I'm like living in my own movie with everyone else. And one of the biggest takeaways that I've had from it is how much we need one another and how important that is. I was very isolated, particularly after my husband died. I couldn't even speak of it for 5 years. And I thought that was okay. And it really has, being together with all of you, I've realized how much we do need each other and how important that connection is. And it just further enmeshes me in everything. And as I said, gosh, it's expanded me beyond even this planet to all planets beyond this dimension, to all dimensions beyond our humanality, to all entities, all beings, all spiritual, physical or not. It's just one wonderful thing. That was a little gosh story that turned into a long diatribe.
It was a brilliant talk, though. It was really lovely. And yes, we do, don't we? We talk about everything, amazing experiences people have, and how the same theme plays out, because dreams are a huge part too. We do a dream circle one week and we do a gosh the next. So you played into your dream that everybody had dreamed about extraterrestrials this week, that we shared ET dreams. And your sacred cow, of course, as you said, is like a god in essence, isn't it? And of course, ancient cultures would have looked at ETs as gods. It's been written about. But that dream life is we'll have to do that one another time, because I think we're actually around about time. So I might have to wrap it up, which is a bit sad, but never mind. We can always get together again, which I'd really enjoy, actually. That was great.
I wanted to just say that we're so socialized to take these things for granted. And what I've gotten from Gosh is not to take them for granted, and to really listen and watch for the message or the guidance that is in these things for me. So that is something I really appreciate about Gosh.
And have you noticed that also we don't plan on what we're going to talk about? We don't know what we're going to talk about, and we're really okay with that because of the beauty in the unfolding of whatever it happens to be that we're sent to talk about for information, and then it just goes from there. But we don't plan it out. We don't even know what it's going to be, and I think we're surprised ourselves sometimes of what direction we're taken in. We just go with the flow.
And it actually is almost difficult for people to do that, to not plan, to just leave it. We had a choice early on. We'd been going with the flow, and I gave everyone a choice that we could pick a topic, and everyone stayed with, let's just go with the flow. And it works really brilliantly. Spirit can use it very well. So thank you all. Thank you to Beyond Being Human, of course. Anybody listening could look at the website, beyondbeinghuman.org. There's some amazing people on there and some fabulous stuff being done and coming up, and you can take out a membership. Highly recommend it. And thank you all once again. It's very brave to share these things because we're really trained not to. It's time for that to stop. We do need to share them because as you've all testified, your lives have been greatly enhanced by sharing these things. But you, Bill, it always strikes me how much so fast.
Well, they said, Kim, that the only way they could do it was in the winter of my life.
Yeah.
So that I had the lifetime experiences. And it's been a journey on a rocket talking about ETs, a journey in the cosmos. There's so much, and it's absolutely fascinating. And Gosh is certainly the place where you can share your experiences with like-minded people.
By sharing with the group, sometimes the group can get us to look at it and really see what the message is in it that we may be blinded to ourselves. That I know several times that's happened with me.
And I believe it takes a certain amount of strength and vulnerability, bravery to even come to Gosh in the first place. You're already somewhat special to even go and open up and be okay with that. It's some place that we have reached that some people never reach. We're so lucky for us.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Kim.
No, my pleasure. I love talking weird. So thank you all, really.